Before I get into my talk, I'd like to start off with a couple of stories. Once there was a man named Geraldo. Geraldo was obsessed with the color red. He told everyone he knew that red was his favorite color. One day, Geraldo's friend bought him a set of red pins. He presented them to Geraldo and said, "I bought you these because I saw a pack of your favorite color." Geraldo looked at him for a moment before declaring, "I don't know what you're talking about. My favorite color is blue." At another point in time, there was a man named Watson. Watson was an excellent scientist. In fact, he was the one responsible for discovering the inverse squared relationship between distance and gravitational force. One day, in a discussion, a fellow scientist brought up this relationship. Watson responded, "Actually, I've changed my mind. The relationship between gravitational force and distance is linear inverse." Clearly, there's an important difference between these two stories. In the first, Geraldo wasn't ever actually wrong. He had in fact recently decided that his favorite color would now be blue. Despite the answer being able to change at the whim of Geraldo, the answer itself was not subjective. Two people could not have simultaneously differing yet correct answers as to what Geraldo's favorite color is. On the other hand, Watson's statements could not have both been correct. Regardless of which theory was right, it is not possible that the laws of physics changed in accordance with what he thought to be true. Like Geraldo's favorite color, the laws of physics are objective. However, they are objective in a way that exists outside of Watson. This is a pretty obvious distinction, but it becomes harder to categorize the nature of objectivity once the topic becomes more conceptual. Many of you may categorize morality, at least the very basic pieces, as being objective. Even if you believe there can be some debate over the ethics of, for example, stealing for the purpose of survival, or lying to preserve another's feelings, or something in a similar vein, it is almost unarguable that certain actions, such as hurting a newborn without reason, are wrong. So my question is, if you believe morality to be objective in any aspect, which category of objectivity does it belong to? Well, let's first address those who do not believe in a God, or at least not one that is inherently moral. If you still maintain a belief in objective morality, then this morality can only belong to the second category, that it exists outside of interpretation like a law of physics. Otherwise, since there is no godlike figure that can dictate what is universally and objectively moral, every statement of morality would be one of individual opinion, even if a common moral belief is shared by multiple individuals. So suppose there is an objective morality that is inherent to the universe. Well, how do we discover what it consists of? If we try to look through human history to uncover a recurring moral code, we see that the morals held by society are in near constant turmoil. Things that we now consider barbaric and unacceptable were often seen as justifiable and even virtuous in older times, and vice versa. Furthermore, there is no reason for us to believe that the history of moral thinking would inherently trend towards what the objective morality actually is. If we look towards nature, we see an even uglier picture. What is moral consists of the instinctive behavior animals exhibit in the pursuit of survival and reproduction. Killing competitors' children, matricide, rape, and cannibalism are all quite common, and they often are in accordance with the evolutionary goal to spread genetic code. Action of both the natural world and society seems to be guided by the instincts evolved to propagate genes, and who's to say this belief itself should even be considered moral? Maybe there is an ingrained tendency towards certain behavior in all sentient organisms that goes beyond pure survival and reproduction, but even if this is present, what makes a consistent tendency ethical? Tendencies towards various beliefs does not contain the moral punch that makes something right or wrong outside of the context of the beliefs of organisms who possess that tendency. In other words, there's nothing that makes that tendency ethically right or wrong, despite it showing up repeatedly. If we turn away from studying action towards the sciences, objective morality doesn't fare much better. There is nothing in scientific study that has indicated that some sort of fundamental morality permeates the universe. Furthermore, what would this moral code look like if we were to try to discover it? We would have no way to uncover what it is with any confidence. It is not similar to the other four fundamental forces that we have discovered. It is completely different in the sense that it doesn't appear to have any real effect. If there's nothing such as a God to enforce this objective morality, It doesn't actually mean anything for it to exist. Switching gears, suppose you believe in a moral God. If you believe this, you may think that objective morality stems from the Word of God. In fact, many Christian ontologists would argue that an objective morality could not possibly exist without a creator producing it for many of the same reasons that I have just brought up. If you subscribe to this, the objectivity of morals falls within the first categorization. That is, what is moral does not exist without God, and the laws of morality are entirely subject to God's discretion. You can argue that God will never change his mind or falter in his moral convictions because he is perfect, but it is undeniable that a consequence of this categorization is that the moral system you believe to be objectively true is only set up the way it is because God chose to do it that way. God could have dictated morals differently such that murder would be perfectly acceptable, and if he did so, there could be no moral objections to it. In fact, a statement of God's benevolence would no longer contain meaning. By definition, since God's actions define morality, everything he does must be good, not because he has ultimate knowledge of what constitutes good and evil, but because he is morality. However, when you dive this deeply into this definition of morality, it loses the feeling of right and wrong. The definition of ethical behavior is almost arbitrarily decided. If God decided that possessing a certain color shirt was immoral, you have no basis for disagreeing. You might still avoid that color shirt out of self-preservation so you don't get smited, but it would seem silly to believe it's truly wrong to not follow this law, even though it is morally factual. The reason moral law still feels like it pertains to right and wrong is because it just so happens that your belief in right and wrong coincides with what God has declared moral. And what is your belief in right and wrong based in? Well, in this case, nothing, since you have declared that all morals are defined by God and do not exist otherwise. So yes, objective morality has been technically defended, but any sense of right and wrong has really been shredded from the definition. The only real reason one would follow this objective morality would be to avoid incurring God's wrath, not because it is good and righteous. The final alternative would be to believe that morality precedes the existence of a moral God. This falls into the second category of objectivity. Just as the laws of physics exist outside Watson, the laws of morality exist outside God. However, God is perfect and will always coincide with morality. God is still subject to these moral laws and could not change them, but his very existence is already in accordance with them since he is God. In this case, morality exists with or without God, but God is necessary for us to act morally in that he takes on the role of a disseminator and enforcer of moral law. This belief solves many of the problems present in the belief in objective morality without God. We now have a way to understand what the objective morality consists of, and there is a real effect of virtuous or wrongful behavior. God both interprets for us what is right and wrong and is able to hold us accountable. However, an issue still exists with any sort of belief in objective morality not stemming from God. The belief relies on some moral code being fundamental to existence, one that God did not create, regardless of whether he exists or not. If God created all of existence, this moral code must precede existence in the sense that existence cannot be without the moral code present. Otherwise, the moral code wouldn't be necessary and God would be able to alter it. Thus, the moral code exists arbitrarily. It was not created with purpose. Just as if the universe was created by random cosmic events and did not involve a creator, if a moral code precedes the creator, it exists in a similar state. It may be that everything in existence is subject to this moral code, but once again it still lacks the sense of right and wrong. We have been left with a tendency towards certain beliefs or behavior, but nothing to make something truly good or bad, just likely or unlikely. So where does this leave us? If we have no real right and wrong principles to abide by, what are the implications on both societal and individual behavior? Well, you could take it to mean that you could go out and lie, cheat, or steal, and I couldn't give you a reason not to based entirely in logic besides the threat of being punished, which itself is dependent upon you having an interest in self-preservation. But just the fact that there is a societal deterrent means something. There may not be a complex cosmic justification for ethics, but that doesn't mean we have to throw everything into the wind. For the most part, we all feel as if hurting others is pretty bad. That might seem like a pretty flimsy barrier keeping us from violent chaos, but I propose it's actually more solid than you may think. Regardless of whether you believe this tendency has been imbued by God or selected through many millennia of evolution, it is obvious that we have a general interest in preservation, and these instincts guide us towards sets of morals that we then expand upon in an attempt to live even more virtuously. We don't need an infallible objective morality in order to strive towards acting in a humanitarian way. As a society, our interpretations of objective morality, whether accurate or not, are already a reflection of our innate compassion. Yes, there are outliers, but for the most part, the things we think of as problematic evils aren't incredibly rampant. That we might not collapse completely in the absence of objective morality is not actually that surprising when one puts our existence in the context with nature. Without any sort of defined morals, life forms have been thriving for billions of years on Earth solely through instinctive behavior. It is true that many species have gone extinct, but my point is only that it is not like a belief in objective morality and systematic punishment are the only things keeping us from killing each other. Thank you.